This week on Information Technology Leaders, Bud Albers, Chief Technology Officer of Getty Images. Now here's your host, Laura Schildkraut.
Today's guest is the Senior Vice President and Chief Technology Officer of Getty Images, a visual content company. He was an underachiever through high school, but stumbled into the right college offering, which finally got him motivated. Since then, his career has taken him through many states in our nation and many states of mind. A self-defined adrenaline junkie who always gravitates towards the biggest and messiest projects. He's fond of saying that nasty projects call for nasty people, though I didn't find him to be all that nasty. Just someone who always speaks his mind. Please welcome Bud Albers. Where did you grow up?
I grew up in downstate Illinois, not too far away from St. Louis, out in the farm country.
And what did you mean when you told me that you weren't part of the Silver Spoon set?
I definitely was not part of the Silver Spoon set growing up. I grew up on a farm in the Midwest, as I said, and had a father who was just a workaholic. He worked a full-time job, farmed our farm and the 4 neighboring farms, and was constantly looking for new challenges that way. And I wound up working all kinds of hours all the way through high school. Worked a job full-time, worked around the farm, grew up with all sorts of farm labor type things and things that I never ever want to do again.
Is that kind of what got you interested in somehow getting out of there?
Yeah, I think there's some absolutely outstanding aspects of growing up that way in terms of not only the work ethic that you learn and that you pick up, but also kind of the freedom of being out in the open space and those types of things. But it's vastly preferable now when I can do what I do and then you amazingly get a paycheck.
Right.
I haven't had to spend all sorts of hours doing the physical labor, and it's something that I still appreciate today.
What were you like in high school?
Well, I was, to put it mildly, a little bit on the wild side. I mean, I may have, in some circles, had be one on the top 10 list of people not to make it to 30. Okay, any kind of trouble that I could find. I was probably more than a little bit of an underachiever, always in the top end of the intellectual scores, but unfortunately, it was kind of a game to see how little I could do and still get away with. I'm sure none of the folks there ever have done that, right? Slept through class or to see how many times you could get thrown out of a given class just
Well, not
for the
my
heck of it.
class, but that's somebody else's class.
Absolutely.
Of course.
But, I was the brother of my parents had me late in life. I have a couple of sisters, 16, 18 years older than I am. And so they were pretty much grown and gone when I was born to my parents, and they had a child 3 years younger than I was, who was born with a birth defect, and he was hydrocephalic. And when I was probably about 3 and he was born, the hydrocephalic, he didn't have a jugular vein, and so the water backed up onto his brain, and the poor baby, his head was probably about that big, and it did brain damage. And I was the first of my parents, wonderful, hardworking people, who had probably weren't well equipped to deal with that. It's a very tough thing in a family. So I have probably all of gone through the gamut of emotions, right, and where you vent and where you take out those kind of things. And probably in through high school and my early college years, engaged in some fairly destructive behaviors, never drug-induced behaviors, but certainly all kinds of things that you probably would not, that I don't want my children to emulate.
Right. It's very easy to look as an adult and look at the things that you shouldn't have done.
To look back and then also occasionally to do the things you never thought, like, oh my God, I am my parents. This is a scary thing.
Yeah, it's truly frightening. What did you do after high school?
After high school, I didn't go right directly to college. I spent some time working in retail. I worked all the way through high school, so I was kind of accustomed to that. No one in my family had gone to college. I mean, 72 grandchildren, grandchildren kind of thing. No one had gone to college. It really wasn't an expectation. My children now, I brainwash them. My wife brainwashes them that they're not through until they're out there. But for me, it really wasn't. And worked at a minimum wage kind of a situation, kind of continued some of that behavior that I look back today and I'm not real proud of. But then kind of tripped into night school, a little guiding from my parents that maybe you ought to try this. And tripped into some evening computer courses that were being offered and really kind of found my niche, really found something that I enjoyed doing. Kind of got into it, so to speak, and rolled up through quite a few of those courses. And then when the fall came around, actually had gotten enrolled full-time and graduated, finished the program in 3.5 years. And it just kind of was a channel, an outlet for where to go. Because I was pretty used to working. When you talk about the high school years, my father also had a heart attack when I was very young. And so there were a lot of things he couldn't do, and I had to help. I tease my daughter and son now that I had them for the labor, right? But the reality of it is I had to do an awful lot of manual labor, an awful lot of helping, and you always had that in your head where you had it on your mind. You know, what's he doing? Okay, I need to be doing that. I need to be lifting that. I need to be working with that. And the man, which he has since passed on to me, is all kinds of energy, right? So here is a very energetic, physical labor-focused kind of person. And as a kid, I'm like, oh my God, I got to do this and do that and keep going. So, you know, once I got all that energy channeled, then it was okay, more. I can learn this. This is fun. I get this. I can do it.
So is that where the adrenaline junkie sort of started?
I think it probably is.
That?
As I look back on it, you do, as I joked earlier, in some respects, you become your parents. And those traits pass on to you. A humorous story. It's one of those things now. I've got a little bit of a high cholesterol problem. So I tell my mother, you know, talking to her back in the Midwest, and I say, oh, what'd the doctor tell you to do? Exercise. So after about 3 months of exercise and everything else, I call and I'm just frustrated. And I was talking to her again and I said, yeah, it's not working. She said, oh, well, it didn't work for your father either. So,
like, now you tell me.
Now you tell me. Pass that on a little bit earlier. But, you know, in terms of, you know, just pure effort and energy, absolutely inherited that from him. I think he moved, he had built or finished like 11, 12 houses and, when he was younger, and it was just always looking for an outlet for the behavior, an outlet for the energy.
And what college did you end up going to? What was the major, your major?
I went to a local private school. So I worked while I was in college, kind of an offset. I still helped with the farm, helped with, we did all the farm labor as well while I was going to college. College by the name of McKendree College actually has the distinction of being the oldest university or the oldest college in the state of Illinois. And so I got a bachelor's degree in computer science from McKendree.
And how did you go about getting your first job after college?
Oh, mailed resumes, mailed phone calls, talked to people I knew, wound up going through recruiters, and finally landed one with a company called Cybertel, which was in the cellular telephony business back when that market was just exploding in the mid-'80s. And the business, it was fun because the business literally would double every other month, and it was a crisis. You know, you had to figure out, how do you deal with this? The systems weren't in place, doing switch interface programming, business application programming, and the business was growing so rapidly. It was just the ability to get in and do. You weren't bounded by a lot of the structure of a large organization at that point in time, which I think really was one of the best opportunities that I could have possibly had. And I would take things home. I would be coding. I was sitting back after we moved in to a house, my wife and I. I think I must have driven her crazy. I'd stay up late in the middle of the night coding and dialed in and writing code and finding all kinds of, again, energy outlets for myself. We had a number of different systems, and by the time I had finished that job or left there, I was the only one who worked on all the systems we had. So it was a great opportunity to start.
Yeah. What surprised you about that first professional experience?
What surprised me, I guess? I think maybe I was a little surprised with myself. Here in that vein, I had come up, maybe suffered a little bit of confidence. Could I do this? Couldn't I do that? And I'm sure your students go through that all the time. Am I really going to be able to do this when I get out there? I found out I could do that, and it was fun. It was not only, I didn't, as I said before, you get to a point where you're just thrilled that you get to do this, and then
Right.
people would pay you for it.
Because you didn't really have a professional role model, and you had a role model for hard work, but not necessarily for what it's like to work within a corporate setting. Was this corporation a good fit for you as your first job?
Yeah, I think it was, because it gave me the opportunity. I'm still completely an objectives-focused person. Find the target. What do we need to accomplish? And then go as hard as you possibly can after the target. And so it was a great opportunity there. There weren't a lot of structural challenges to getting the work done. It was completely focused on getting the work done. What can you accomplish? And moving on to the next great crisis that all the growth was causing.
One of the things that you said about this company was that you have to be careful about not confusing consensus with correctness. What did you mean by that?
Well, I think when you look at it, and this is in any professional situation, you get a lot of folks who are, for whatever reason, somewhat reticent to speak their mind. And the group then that forms is one that really gets very centric on making sure you're politically correct, making sure that you're all speaking the same way. And there is a big difference. There are times for that, certainly. But there's a huge difference between consensus and correctness, and oftentimes I think those things get crossed over. That businesses and people within the businesses don't do probably what they should do. They don't deliver the shareholder value they need to deliver because they're caught up in believing those two things are the same thing. Not intellectually, but in kind of the stream of consciousness that happens.
It's like believing that effort equals output, and it just doesn't. It would be nice if it did, but...
Yeah, so there are some correlations, but not direct
Right.
in many cases.
And then after about 3 years, you decided it was time to leave. What made that decision come about?
The business was acquired by Ameritech out of Chicago, and it was they paid an astronomical price relative to earnings for the business, and acquired a new fast-growing business in a territory where there were allowed to be 2 cellular providers originally in those days. And they acquired us. We were the unincumbent, if you will. At that time it was Southwestern Bell and this little upstart company, which Ameritech acquired and took under its wing. And I looked at that and I said, oh my God, this is not good for the back office functions, clearly, to pay that much money and to absorb, to let us continue to go in the fashion that we're going. Clearly there are economy of scale opportunities within their business that probably didn't mean good things for me, unless at that time I wanted to leave St. Louis and go to Chicago, which is ironic,
Yes.
I'm sure.
So what were some of the important skills that you gained during that first job that helped you land that second job?
Back in the late 80s, early 90s, it was when IBM was actually introducing the AS400, which today makes me sound probably like a dinosaur. We had one of the first AS400s out of the factory because we were kind of trying to figure out how to consolidate, how to grow. Platforms couldn't get big enough for us, but we didn't want to go to mainframes. We weren't that large a shop. And so getting that box, and because I was the only one who worked on all the other systems, it was pretty natural that I could get in and live with this one and get us migrated over to it. And I got to work with some of the engineers out of the factory and very, very focused on that platform and learned it very, very well. The job that I accepted at the train company, they had just received some AS400s. They were looking to consolidate their, at that time, System 36 environments and regional call centers into St. Louis, into and onto that platform. And I interviewed with, at that time, the Vice President of Technology, CIO by today's standards. And he said, Bud, I've got a problem. I need to figure out how to get people migrated onto this platform. It's not working. Can you do that? And I said, sure, I can do that. Went home and talked to my wife and said, I don't know how I'm going to do that. She said, you can get that done. Figure it out. And absolutely got it done in short order.
One of the things that you did as part of the job at the train company was you got downtime down to, I think it was less than 5 minutes per year, which was a pretty amazing accomplishment for anybody who's kind of run an operational area. What were some of the things that you did to get those numbers so solid?
We were running the national consolidated call centers, and in those days we'd do $300,000–400,000 an hour when the days would warm up in the summertime. People's air conditioning would break, and your dealers always had a couple of different places they could call. and pick up product that wasn't yours. So keeping them up and available was key. We got very rigorous about how we tested the application, how we did production turnover, how we patched the operating environment, and just very, very focused on making sure the machines were in place, making sure people knew what they were supposed to do, making sure that the proper steps and processes and procedures happened. And we got very good at keeping those systems up and running.
Did you find that you had a lot of resistance for some of the things you were trying to do, or did everybody pretty much rally behind the goal?
I think people understood the goal. At that point, I had moved into really my first management role, and I had gotten into the management role there for all the right reasons. I was the best technologist. Okay, so no training, no anything. I imagine a bit hard to live with, very demanding, and really pushed people very hard to make sure that we hit the objective, that we made the goal, that we kept those systems up and running. Very, very important to the business, and made sure we hit that.
You were also involved with consolidating some systems to run, I believe, on the AS400, a single AS400 environment. What were some of the challenges involved in that first consolidation?
Those weren't all, in theory, right? You could absorb an environment. A System 36 could run in an emulated mode on an AS400. But they had never thought about running multiple 36s in a single consolidated mode. So I actually kind of got involved personally and worked on how you would run 3 virtual machines in one. And so that was probably the biggest challenge technically to get that done.
You were then promoted to Senior Information Technology Manager. How did that role differ from the role that you had previously?
Really, that role was the bulk. The division that I was in was focused on distribution. The company was split into 2 manufacturing units and a distribution and sales organization. And the company kind of did a little restructuring to realign the units. The gentleman I was working for went back to run one of the other units, and I took pretty much what was his job. So found myself with close to 80, 100 staff and running the overall sales and distribution and the operations associated with that. The challenge for me was I was 26 years old and had, as we spoke earlier here, all the wonderful management training. I was doing the job for absolutely the right reason. I was the best technologist. So it really forced a lot of adaptation on my part, a lot of learning on how to manage people, how to lead people, and try and begin to figure out how to motivate people to do the job.
Did they accept you right off, or did you really have to earn their trust?
It's kind of a mixed message. I think the people who I had worked with, who I had led with a lot of the accomplishments that earned me the shot at that job, stayed in the fold, and we were able to get those things done. Others were a little less trusting. I was a little bit green, a little bit younger, and had to really prove my worth. And in some cases it was take a run at the kid, this very old line manufacturing organization, take a run at the kid, see if he's going to stand his ground. But a lot of it's about learning how to work, right? Whether you are writing code for a living or whether you're flipping burgers at McDonald's, it's what's your work ethic, how do you get things done, what's it all about? And I'm not a tremendously political animal. As I said, I'm pretty much objectives focused. And I think started that way, kept that focus, and probably still largely have it today.
Given that, would you still rather solve machine problems or people problems?
Well, there's what I often term shit they don't teach you about when you get your computer science degree. Sometimes you get into this business if you're in the code writing and the systems development aspects of it, because you really get a reward out of the creation. At least I did. Out of actually developing it. I mean, you've done this job, right? You see the code come up, it comes to life, and you really appreciate that. You learn to get more of a long-term focus, goal, and reward out of leading people. I mean, one of the most rewarding aspects of my current job was to take someone who was very, very burned out in their existing role, who really had given it absolutely all she had, and the environment wasn't conducive to her continuing in that role and with the company. Pull her out, put her in a role where she can succeed, and seeing them succeed and make a real contribution back to the business and kind of re-energize. So the rewards are in both places, but it takes a different form.
And I would assume that as an adrenaline junkie, you're probably also used to getting these short-term rewards. So it must have taken you a while to get used to finding the satisfaction in the longer-term ones?
Yeah, it probably did. It probably sometimes still maybe not, nothing sometimes moves as fast as I would like. And I think as one of my guys have said, I love to work for you. The problem is you want 120% all the time. And that's, you know, as you look at it, it is difficult to make those transitions. But the business world today moves so fast. The cycles are shrinking all the time. And we've got to move that fast. And you've got to not only move that fast, you've got to be good at it. You've got to be successful with it. Because the shareholders don't reward a nice try.
Right.
Yeah, I bought the stock because they gave it a damn nice try.
Back to that effort versus output.
Absolutely.
They're not the same. During this time, you also started your MBA. What made you decide to do that, and how was it going?
Well, what made me decide to do it is I absolutely love to learn. Okay, I hope that the day that I retire, that I learn something. That's the other thing, I guess, being a little bit adrenaline focused. Technology's great because by the time I am bored with something that's going on, the next new thing is on the horizon. And so that desire to learn, to grow, to get better, because I'm also a bit of a perfectionist. I've got people who'll watch this and say a bit, okay. But, you know, the ability to continue to grow and learn is something that, as I said, I hope I do all throughout my career. I did a 4.0 at Washington University in St. Louis through that program while I was there. I actually never got a chance to finish that as I wound up moving on to get involved with a venture-backed environment.
And then what happened that brought that move about?
I was working with that organization, and they were a vendor to me. And one of my contacts there actually said, the CEO, if you ever decide you don't want to do this anymore, he would really be very interested in you coming on board. So I was looking at that and trying to figure out what I was going to do next. The old line mentality of the company that I was with was very much grade and slide. You could have a level, and then your pay within that level. I think looking at the 80-some people on my payroll, I was probably 50th on the chart, saying, this isn't a lot of fun.
Right.
I've got all this grief, and this is what I'm doing. Maybe I ought to talk to him. And that and the idea of getting onto the vendor side of the table and developing maybe more diverse solutions for a broader range was a new challenge.
So they basically hired you on, in a sense, without having a direct job for you.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
In that opportunity. It was much as I did with the train company, much as I did with Cybertel before that, the opportunity to get in and make my own job, really leverage it. The job that I wound up doing, they were beginning in the era of mainframe downsizing, moving people off of the old IBM mainframe pieces to Unix, and they were beginning to take that on. It was at that time, 4GL Unix shop that was working for the first time with some larger companies. And I was able to, taking my direct experience at Train, building systems in a very large environment back in the days when companies still built systems,
Right.
and translate that directly into a vendor side. ERP, I think, is the term of art today, was a great challenge.
Now, this job also required a move to another location. Where was that, and did that make that a harder decision?
Made it a little bit harder. I talked to my wife about it, and she has always been so tremendously supportive. She prefers me when I'm energized and moving and challenged, and God love her, she tries to keep me that way all the time. And it's easier on her when I'm that way, because that energy has to go somewhere.
Right.
And so we picked up and moved to Colorado Springs. There are worse places to do time.
Truly.
So we did several years in the shade of Pikes Peak and helped that business grow pretty much from about $3 million in software and services in their new products group to 48, I guess, 4 years later.
One of the things that you did while you were there is you changed the organizational structure to a matrix structure. Can you talk about what a matrix structure is and what the advantages and disadvantages of that are? Because it's kind of complicated.
Yeah, we had a situation there where I wound up running a group that was doing custom software development for our clients. And that group was not as productive as you could be because the demand was very, very unpredictable. It was about as predictable as the message light on my phone. We'd like you to do this. Can you do this for me? Can you do that? And so it was constantly a challenge. How do you balance work? One team has got a multitude of work, another team has no work. And I looked at that, and it was a group that had done, I guess, about 320,000, was unprofitable. And they asked me if I could fix it. Back to the, could I fix it? Yeah, I could do that. How are you going to do that?
I don't know.
Then my wife, God love her, I am always in that discussion. Well, do you think if I did this? Because I'm a totally driven analytic, and she is just so empathetic and understands where people come from, so I'm always bouncing things off of her. We have a great partnership that way. And so we walked through there, and it was, well, how do the people feel about it? Do they have leadership? You know, what's the right way to go? And so we came to a structure that said you would have a mentor for administration, administrivia, that can help you with your career development, help deal with personal issues, etc. But you would float beneath the leads of those teams based on whoever gave you, who had the work, make sure you had it balanced. We wrote a system. It's the other wonderful thing about managing technical people. If you make them do something they don't want to do, they will write a system underneath it to support it and rid the mundane. And we developed a system underneath of us to support that work, so we knew who had what job, who was loaded, how did it work. So you could literally, from any of my area leads, have work for any number of different customers and accounts, but always have someone you could turn to for administration. And then we met weekly to make sure we knew who was loaded and who was working, who did what well, who needed to grow in what area. So it's a challenge, but we created a very fulfilling environment that we took from about a small $300,000 revenue base to several million a couple of years later, and did it with a 30% plus pre-tax profit. And the people were driven, they were challenged, and rewarded as part of that goal.
Were there any downsides to doing that?
There were downsides. Okay, it was a very quantifiable and measurable environment, and that's where I kind of developed a philosophy that still stays with me today as far as managing people. You know, people in an organization, particularly sometimes in large organizations, people perform at different levels. They come in, they go out. Some fits are better than others. But when I was an individual contributor, you knew who performed and who didn't. Okay, you always did. I mean, Laura, you had to. You knew who pulled their weight on a team and who did not. It's always an IQ test for the management team, whether or not they do. And I've got a philosophy now that you work with the people who don't assume they're bad people. All right, make sure, are they miscast? Are they in the right job? All right, do they have the tools they need to do their job? Do they have the motivation? Are there personal issues? Are there things we can help with? Okay, and how do you get people's performance up? Always move them up, but you've got to deal with the issue. You've got to deal with the non-performance, deal with it head on.
Right.
Because the people in the organization, it's not fair to the rest of the team to have someone who's not pulling their weight. And it's management's job to make sure that it's dealt with.
Right. You eventually were moved to Texas and had a couple of different roles there. How did that move kind of come about?
The move really came about through an acquisition. We acquired a competitor of ours that had fallen on hard times. Actually was run by the court system while they were looking for an acquirer. So it's hard to get much further down the chain than where they had fallen, but they had a wonderful customer base that we were very covetous of. They were originally going to let the company be run by the gentleman who was in charge when it went out of business. And I was working for a couple of conservative good old boys from Iowa who were pretty straight-laced group. And the company we acquired was a little bit less so, much to their chagrin as they began to understand what was going on. And companies don't necessarily just find their way to bankruptcy. Many of them earn it. And these folks had earned it. And so when they had found they had many more problems than they had thought, one of the owners who had moved to Houston had decided he was going to run that pretty much on a part-time basis, and I went down and ran most all the operations outside of sales, and the goal was to get it back to profitability.
Yeah. I mean, you're from Midwest, so I assume you can do the whole sort of good old boy thing.
Yeah.
But did you find it hard to be accepted in this particular network?
Well, I did live in Texas long enough to know that y'all is singular and all y'all is plural. But Yeah, it was a little bit of a learning experience, and I think very much if you deal with the work aspects of it, one of those, first time you do a turnaround, it's tougher than the next time. And we were successful in that turnaround. We had them on to about a 13% pre-tax profit 11 months later. May not get many Christmas cards there, but
Right.
it was profitable. And I think what I learned from that and the cultures inside of a company and an environment were really that you've got to make change at a pace that people can make it. And if the people can't, in the leadership roles, make that change, you have to. And so if I look back on it, yeah, I learned some things that have served me very well later on in the process.
So you eventually sort of stopped the bleeding in terms of the money and the employees, but then what happened to the company?
Well, the company was founded by two gentlemen who were very, very close. They had basically raised their family together. They had moved the business from Iowa when it was very small and an idea with some backing and a first-generation product out to Colorado. And when they sold the company, it was fairly widely known that they couldn't be in the same room together. So they sold the business, which led to a period of uncertainty, and moved on. And it was a major transition. Major transition.
So then, under the heading of Small World, you took a job not only with Ameritech, which you had tried to avoid several years ago, but you also ended up in Chicago. Did it seem odd to accept that position?
There was a certain amount of irony in the job, and going to Chicago where not necessarily where I hadn't necessarily ever thought I would go, but it was a great learning experience. And when I talked to my wife about it and said, okay, we could go back to Colorado under new management and go back and deal with that, or we could go to Chicago. And she said, let's go to Chicago. So you can do it. Let's go to Chicago. And we did. Fantastic experience. I got involved in something in 1995 or so that was termed electronic commerce.
Yep.
And I, thought, oh God, let's go get a book and figure out what that is.
Yeah.
And it was actually a combination of more of an incubator inside of a large company with several very, very senior and mature software businesses bundled in. And so it was a fabulous opportunity to pretty much work all ends of that spectrum.
Right. So you ended up working in e-commerce when the whole concept of e-commerce and e-business is just sort of cutting its teeth now. What were some of the projects that you were working on back then?
We did some really fascinating early stage work. We put in the first digital signature, first approved to my knowledge, digital signature app in the U.S. for probate filing in the LA County court system. We had released a product called Civic Link, which was kind of an e-government initiative. We were looking at, I had a group that reported into me that ran engineering for a little-known fact, Ameritech. The $14 billion RBOC was the largest provider of library automation systems in the world. And so that was an interesting group. I sometimes was a little bit too wired for the librarians at the user meeting, but we did healthcare initiatives, health information networks. I think collectively some of the services we ran then are now ASPs. And the last thing we did there was put the Atlantic Canada online project in. We developed the engine that ultimately became the underpinning to that project.
So with all this fascinating work, you only stayed about a year. What made that come about?
About 20 months, and we had some unprofitable businesses there that we had shed. We were driving to some new objectives, had some great new ideas that were pretty close to coming to the fore. And the company was acquired by SBC. Okay, and if they shut it down and they could restate earnings, it was accretive to the shareholders. And so we took, at that time I was also running product management on a couple of new initiatives that I had people really working their tails off, energized about what they were doing, and we were kind of on a mission. And you get the cold water in the face of shut it down. That was, to quote Jimmy Buffett, that was Margaritaville for a couple of days.
Yeah.
And just totally derailed. And was involved as one of the hardest things you'll ever have to do. As I said earlier, if people are not performing, I want to give them every chance to perform. And if they can't do it and it's just not a good fit, then you deal with it, and that's okay. It's not pleasant, and I always do a self-introspection. Was there something else I should have done? Was there some other avenue, some other tact, some other thing I should have done?
Right.
But it was really tough to take people who are performing at a very high level and to say, by an accident, not anything within your control, you, all y'all, okay, no longer have a job.
Right.
And not only that, we need to finish Atlantic Canada online.
Right.
You know, have a nice summer, let's get it done. Okay, and you know, that was hundreds of people. So it was spinning, selling, shutting, and it was quite a messy business.
Yeah, it's pretty miserable.
It's not high on my list of things to do again.
No. So then you ended up moving back to St. Louis and worked for Monsanto. Did you enjoy kind of moving away from the vendor side and back to the IT side?
Well, when I left Ameritech, I had an opportunity to stay with the newly merged company, but I was on the lunatic fringes of the Arbach and didn't want to go inside. Working with Monsanto and moving back into a role where I headed the technology architecture strategy and enterprise apps, they had two senior positions they folded in that that I took and kind of into a combined group, and there were some great technical challenges with that, and some brilliant people. I mean, they were running one of the larger commercial DNA gene sequencing operations, okay, doing a lot of agronomic research in that area. So there were some fascinating technical challenges. So I did miss being so far away from the customer, so far away from the revenue generating side, you know, so far away from that cutting edge and the challenge, that was much less than rewarding. Got to see the aspects of the merger business again. Pretty much almost a year to the day from having gotten the call to shut down at Ameritech. Came in the next morning to find out we were merging with American Home Products. At the time, it was a pooling of interest merger that at the time was about $100 billion merger, and with two of the companies at that state in the life sciences business, you know, agricultural, both chemicals and genetic product. Monsanto did a lot of work around modification of the genome to support Roundup, their chemical. The good news is if you spray Roundup on something, it kills it. Bad news is it kills it no matter what. So spraying it in a crop field was always tough. So they had done DNA sequencing to allow you to spray it on corn or crop that was genetically modified to be resistant to the very process that caused the other plants to die. So that part of it existed. There was a food portion of it and in the life sciences strategy there was also pharmaceuticals because of the great deal of similarity in the DNA. And they were merging with American Home. Monsanto had been cash poor and pipeline rich because they had acquired a number of very old line businesses, things like DeKalb genetic seed corn, as kind of a precursor to introducing biotech to the world at large. And the problem is they acquired for about $8 billion. They got about $900 million, roughly, give or take, I guess, in revenue, and 5% pre-tax. All right, and once that genetic reality didn't kick in as quickly as it needed to, it needed funding source. And so the merger with American Home Products brought it together. Absolutely the two cultural antitheses of one another. So you sometimes learn more from what fails than what succeeds. I should know a lot about mergers at this point. But the two cultures were Bob Shapiro, the chairman of Monsanto, who was very well educated, brilliant man, looking kind of a visionary, tore down all the executive offices, put everybody in cubes, very eclectic character. And the gentleman who ran American Home, absolute command and control. everything had to be approved. They had this crazy AHT system. You had to, if you wanted to have an idea that you could pursue at all and spend time on, you had to get it approved by entering it into the system. So trying to spend time in the middle, figuring out how you marry those two cultures, was just an absolutely enormous experience in terms of different people, different views, different attitudes. And in the middle of it, we started the day the merger was announced. They announced the heads of the divisions, the CFO, and that we would have co-CEOs.
That's a bad sign.
Yeah, now looking back, that's no longer in vogue. And in that process, we spent 9 months trying to figure out how to consummate the merger before it was called off.
Right.
And at that point, my wife called me. She said, "Oh my God, you're on CNBC. You're going to open down 20."
Scary.
To which I joked, "Geez, I shouldn't have hired in here on the technology side. I should have been the CEO. What's the worst thing I could do? Lose half the market cap?"
Right.
And we did. And very much changed the company.
I'll bet. Kind of irreparably.
Absolutely, and it put us in a spot where we were looking for suitors, an acquisition. And having gone away from that, having a buyout be imminent, or having gone away from the customer, come away from the failed merger, an imminent buyout, was not a lot of fun. And I moped around for several months, and my wife looked at me and she said, I came home one night, she said, "You are absolutely miserable. You are driving yourself crazy. You're driving me crazy. Go figure out something else to do. This is just not good."
And so this was the first time that you actually left a job without having another job, but fairly quickly you got 6 job offers. And what made you decide to accept the Getty Images job?
Well, after I declared free agency and said, "Okay, I'll give you 90 days. We're going to wrap this stuff up. We'll make sure we don't leave any loose ends, transition projects, do the right thing by the business." I had 6 offers. And Getty is, if you look at Getty Images, it's a wonderful product. Right? Absolutely wonderful, visual, beautiful product. Harms no one, right? I had just come from the company that made Agent Orange, for God's sake. All right, so the reality is it was back closer to the customer, web-centric, back into that e-commerce thing, okay, which I had helped some at Monsanto, but it clearly wasn't the company's mission. It's been Getty's mission to take the business, roll it up, take it to the web. And that was really kind of, by the time you put the company mission, the technological challenge of taking diverse, non-integrated organizations, building a new one, and bringing the business to the web, that was the kind of thing that kind of got the adrenaline flowing.
Yeah.
Said, I can do that.
I want to talk a little about those mergers. You'd had a couple of mergers that were not particularly happy experiences, and you come to a company where they were bringing a lot of different companies together. Was that a particular challenge in trying to do that and build some consistency?
It's more fun being the buyer than being bought.
Truly,
okay.
yeah.
And it's an ongoing challenge, but one that if you look at the results that we've had, it continues to be very, very successful. You find new synergies every day, and those are exciting. Okay, you bring the collections together, you add value to the customer in the market, which clearly with the breadth of the collection we're assimilating, we're doing every day.
And the collection is collection of
imagery, collection of film product, motion product, and footage, and you're kind of rolling it up. You're giving the customer a better product. You're giving it to them in a way that what previously was in the quote-unquote analog world was a very long, drawn-out, and arduous process. We now have a patent pending search technology that we've developed that cuts that down to a matter of minutes, if not seconds, to get things through that pipeline and do it with a high-touch customer service organization that makes it a lot of fun.
Did you find that any of these companies were somewhat unwilling to give up their systems?
No system is ever so loved as the day that you decide you're going to kill it, right? And so there is an element of that, and there's an element of that every day, and that's okay. You have to keep pointing down the road, because it's in front of you, not behind you, and that will be a challenge for all eternity. Maybe our children won't have to deal with it, but we sure do.
Yeah. What are some of the other challenges you face as the CTO?
Well, clearly you always wind up with balancing the people challenges. Okay, I've been able to assemble a fantastic team with some very, very smart people who keep things going on a daily basis, if I can keep from meddling long enough, right? And so there are the people challenges, there are the technology challenges, the budget issues. There's never enough. One of the challenges of this business is there are many, many more good ideas always that can be funded. So making sure that you've got people committed in the right places, at the right levels, and balancing just the concurrent number of things that go on, and such is the chaos that is my life, right? And trying to keep all that knitted together on any given day is a challenge.
Truly. You had said once that you were a good leader but a lousy manager. What makes you so good at one and so bad at the other?
I am absolutely, as you found trying to get me ready for this, just absolutely terrible on administration. This is a good thing for all the folks out there. You can just blame it on being technical. At least it works for a while, right? Well, I didn't do that. I'm technical. Okay, well, and they all look at you and they understand, right? But the net is...
They don't understand, but they forgive.
Yeah, that's probably a better way to put it. But so I am rotten on the administration, but as one of my folks has said, he's told me I'm a Chautauqua preacher. Get people fired up, get them going down the road. And that really energizes me to help people get the vision and to see what's possible. And so from that perspective, I'm usually great at leading and motivating and getting smart people. It's all about people. You know, the other thing they don't tell you when you get your computer science degree is this isn't really a technical business.
No.
It's a people business. And it continues to be a people business.
Right.
I personally look at every resume for every person that we hire, no matter what level. And I'm not a rubber stamp. And particularly, obviously I would interview my direct reports, but I insist in interviewing anyone they're going to hire to report to them. And everyone else will be positive, and no, no, and I'll make them argue. I'm reversible if they argue, okay? And they are always free to come in and argue and push back. Okay, that's an open door. Any organization I run, I hate making clones out of people. Personalities are great, they're fine, they're how people drive and how they express themselves. And you need to let people go, and I've even gone as far as to say, it's okay to be caustic in my organization. Now understand, that's your margin for error.
Right.
If you're caustic, you can be caustic, but damn it, you better be right.
Right.
Okay, because there's now no margin for error. But you know, looking at that, that's, you know, those areas, I think I bring a lot of leadership. If it's, you know, I have a lady who does a great job of helping keep me on track. It's probably the only reason you got anything from of the material you required before I got here.
Yeah.
She's very good, very helpful, and really probably the reason that I know where to go, when to go there, and what to do when I get there.
Given that all the numeric things that you've mentioned in this interview, you also are fond of saying that you can't manage what you can't measure. Can you tell us more about that approach?
Yeah, I try to, you know, I think one of the people in our business, and I forget if it was Howard Rubin or who it was, said if you don't know where you're at, a map doesn't help.
Right.
Okay, are we getting better? Are we getting worse? Worked for a gentleman at Monsanto who had another saying that I love to steal, and that is, in God we trust, for all else bring facts. Okay, and you know, there is always a subjective service-oriented aspect to it. But for the most part, you got to get to quantifiable.
Right.
And if things are quantifiable and measurable, then you can improve on it. And so I look at things, for us, system availability, you know, granted, everyone in the web space does it. Well, where are we? How are we going to get better? How does it improve? Okay, what's the next level? Okay, and those things are very, very important.
Do you think throughout your career it's been more important to be an IT guy who understands business or a business person who understands IT?
I don't think the world is that simple anymore. I really don't think it's that simple. If you looked at the latest Wired magazine, Andy Grove was quoted as saying, every company is an internet company.
Right.
The issue is, it's what are the objectives and how do you get there and what are the tools that you need to enable the objective. So I think in my organization there's absolutely no reason not to understand the business objective, basic fundamental skills of profit loss. Okay, those things are key, even if you work inside the vendor environment. You can isolate yourself if you want to say, I'm just going to write code, I'm just going to sit here and for 8 or 10 hours today, or the Microsoft environment for 25 hours today, I'm going to blow code. But the reality is then you won't understand many of the reasons for the decisions that are made around you, and it's a pretty open key to be frustrated. As I look at many of my technology strategy tools that I look at are not only the tools of what's the neatest, greatest thing, but what are the markets? What are the chances for success? And so there's no way you can divorce the two. No matter what part of it, at the end of the day, it all comes down to whether or not there's a business there in the light of most of the environments I've worked in.
Salmon have to overcome incredible odds to survive. Sometimes people can help. I led a research project on flow rates in a local stream. Working with research assistants from psychology and English opened my eyes to the complex relationship between science and public policy. Now, when I work with school kids at the UW hatchery, I tell them the whole story of salmon, forests, streams, and human habitation. Future generations, salmon, and people will benefit from our research.
I was interested in what you were talking about before about their matrix organization, how you changed it. I can imagine a lot of advantages coming out of that, but also a lot of change management problems. How did your employees respond?
How they respond to change. Clearly, you always, when you make change, in that environment, it was largely the same type of work. The way they would respond to change, you had to always ask yourself, is this going to adversely affect them? Okay, because their own earning potential was somewhat tied to their output in there. So you would make exceptions if you had asked them to do something for the business that impacted them in a negative way. You make exceptions in a number of ways, whether that's directly monetary, whether that's in time off, whether it's in recognition. Change is always hard for people. Some people thrive on it and some people can't stand it. And so you kind of tailor things, again, down to an individual level. And you have to, I think you have to do that. And clearly at the highest level you deliver things and messages en masse, if you will. But then you try and hire smart people. Right? And the last thing you do is hire smart people and manage them like they're stupid. All right? It's insulting to the people. You deal with them, you give an open, honest answer. And realistically, there are times even they won't like the message. But you do the best you can. And if you're open and honest with them, and you try and be fair in how you distribute anything that impacts people, you usually get a reasonable response people can understand.
So overall, that was a successful effort?
For the task that we had at hand, which was developing custom needs as an adjunct to the standard product that we sold the customer, and dealing with all the ebbs and flows of demand and working with different people, I couldn't imagine a more successful model for that particular application. There are times for consensus, there are times for command and control, and the balance ebbs and flows somewhere between.
Since Getty Images operates in just about 50 countries and is so heavily technology-based, how do you coordinate efforts between managers on countries, or are there other CTOs, or how does this work?
The way that one of the things that I tried to do early was make sure that all of the folks were in that reporting organization, were in the structure that we could communicate. The key people from around the globe we have in a conference call every week where we communicate, make sure they understand what we're doing. They all have a forum to raise the issues. It's pretty much a round robin. Make sure they hear everyone else's issues, people know what's going on, and can participate, whether it involves them or not. And we've had our Art.com subsidiary, for example, in Chicago, which many of the things were not germane. But then all of a sudden you go through and something will pop up that very much affects everybody in the game plan. And the other way that we do it is I've established a program management office that's responsible for driving initiatives, making sure people know who's responsible to do what, when, where, and to also work through their air traffic control, right? In a very complicated environment when we have global presence, cultural differences, time zone differences, and people need to know who's responsible for delivery and where they can look, who the appropriate person is. And so all of those things are hopefully controlled on any given day. Some days better than others, but they do a great job in keeping people informed and on point.
Where do you see Getty Images in the next 5 years?
We're in a great spot in our industry. We're the largest player in the industry. I see us continuing to roll up market share. I think it's continuing to grow, continuing to really expand the offer that we give to our customers in terms of new capabilities, new opportunities, better choice, better selection. And I think most of those roads, one way or another, are going to come through the technology organization for delivery to render that. So I see us providing some managed services, increased coverage on the content side, and continuing to find ways to adapt to new challenges, such as what's the content, the visual content that'll play in the next generation of web advertising, right? I think everybody would probably say that banner ads are passé, whether we run them down the page sideways or not. They're probably somewhat passé today. And so how do you get there? What's in there from a motion product perspective? What's in there from a pure visual content perspective? And how do we help our customers then turn around and deliver something that is more effective?
The University of Washington Business School, located in Seattle, Washington, ranks among the top business schools in the United States. Information Technology Leaders is one of the many ways the UW Business School forges partnerships and reaches out beyond the university. For more information about the University of Washington Business School or Information Technology Leaders, visit informationtechnologyleaders.com.
Bud is an intuitive problem solver. When no one else knows where to start, he brings sanity to the chaos by defining a vision and an approach that makes sense, though he sometimes finds it hard to be patient when he sees the solutions so clearly. He's also that rare breed who can talk technical to the techies and numbers to the business folks. That's how he gets things approved, and then how he gets things done. He's gifted at managing compromises and articulating trade-offs, which has been critical to his success at Getty Images. I've learned so much by watching him. I only wonder if he'll ever slow down. I guess we wonder the same thing. Thank you very much for being here.